Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your hosts, Chris Jennings and Dr. Mike Brasher.
Today we got a special guest, Tony Vandemore, owner, operator, guide at Habitat Flats. Tony, welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
No problem. I think, main reason why we reached out to you here is we wanted to kind of get a feel for the flooding impacts that you've dealt with. And I think everyone got a good glimpse of it on social media. You were posting some pretty good stuff. But what we really wanted to talk to you about is kind of the impacts on the vegetation, on the habitat in your area with being in such a high volume migration area. We really just want to get a feel from you from on the ground. So can you kind of just describe and kind of play out the process of the flooding, this spring and into summer?
Well, first and foremost, I'd just like to say that this is just from our little part of the country. It was devastating and tragic for, majority of the Midwest, really. A lot worse than what we had here. South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois. It was a very, very, very big, widespread flood event in 2019. And, it started for us the end of March. We kind of started battling it. And then really it hit its peak the end of May. And that's when the majority of the levees along the Missouri River failed. Everything we have at our home lodge, all those levees were overtopped, which is, it's horrible to see. We're not able to get any crops in, any of the ag ground. It was just a devastating thing for everybody along in these river bottoms. The only blessing in disguise, I guess, you got to try to find a positive in anything, is that it took place primarily May and June, and the water got off our area anyway. And I can't speak for others because a lot of areas are still water on it. But it came off at the right time of year. So it really, I think most people, when they look at moist soil management, and, you get an incredible response just by taking water off at the right time of the year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard for people to do. I think they take it off, way too early, and they're left with a bunch of non-desirable plants out there in their wetlands. Whereas this, it kept water on until the middle or end of June. So when it came off, the moist soil response has been incredible.
And so, Tony, this is Mike. I'm assuming you incorporate moist soil management into some of your habitat work there. And was the timing of the water coming off, was that similar to what you normally do?
It is. At the end of the year, I'll kind of get my management plans for each farm. And typically, the earlier you take water off, the more your woody type vegetation, say smart weeds you get, mm-hmm. and the later you're taking it off, is the more grasses you're going to get. So I'll do different farms at different times.
One quick question kind of relating to that as well is overall the potential impacts. What are you seeing, area-wide? You're in the Golden Triangle of Missouri. You've got Swan Lake National Wildlife Refuge, Grand Pass, and Fountain Grove right there. What are you seeing, basically landscape-wide around you that could potentially impact migration this fall with basically a lack of food or, lack of certain types of habitats?
Well, there's certainly going to be a lack of agricultural crops. Beans and corn and all that. There's virtually nothing planted in the bottoms, mm-hmm. Anywhere to speak of. But that being said, area-wide, field after field after field, as far as you can see, is incredible moist soil habitat. They're probably better than I've ever seen it.
Wow. Just
because it kept, the water came off at the right time. Nobody really had to do anything.
That's interesting, yeah.
What are the primary species of grasses and sedges, whatever else that you see coming up that you're getting pretty excited about having out there?
Primarily what I'm seeing is a very good smartweed response, excellent yellow nut sedge, and excellent wild millet. I guess, what I call wild millet, some people call it barnyard grass or whatever. It's always so interesting to me that the seed bed is so dynamic. I mean, there's tens of thousands of acres of that plant, that are fields that have been in agricultural production and sprayed for, since the last big flood of 93. I mean, they haven't had a weed in them, and you get 1 year with floodwater on them where you can't get in there, and it's 100% smartweed, nutsedge, and wild millet.
Yeah,
it's just incredible.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's impressive how, just prolific all those moist soil.
And then on some of those areas where the water came off a little bit later, what are you seeing, or what have you had to do to try to get a good response out of those areas?
Well, I mean, there were some areas, definitely, we had a lot of it, where the water came off late, and eventually it would have came up, in natural moist soil foods, but I wanted to spur it along. I planted 4 pallets of Jap millet and buckwheat, just zipping around out there in the Ranger, spreading that stuff in 6 inches of mud, and have had an excellent response from that. I mean, our stands look phenomenal. We've had just enough rain to give it plenty of moisture and, plenty of sun. A lot of times it seems like, at least in years past, when something like this has taken place and I've had to go back in and try to plant millet or buckwheat or whatever in July, it ends up burning up. It goes from flood to drought, and that hadn't been the case this year. So even the natural foods, the foods that we were able to get planted, everything looks phenomenal.
And you're seeing a similar response on some of the adjacent properties or throughout that area. The moist soil response is pretty good.
It's probably the best moist soil I've seen ever. All across the area, just because that water stayed on, and really, people did not have to do a thing. They didn't have to worry about the boards. To me, the ag type stuff is pretty easy. And, you plant beans, you spray them. There's not much to it. Your moist soil, your wetlands, areas that typically don't flood. They're work. They're a ton of work. Because they're WRPs, Wetland Reserve Program. They're wetlands for a reason, because you can't get them dried out. It's tough to control invasive species and that sort of thing. But a year like this, it was kind of the perfect storm for good moist soil production.
Be the first to know when ducks are on the move. Sign up for DU's waterfowl migration email alerts and receive ongoing in-depth updates on the latest habitat conditions, weather changes, and hunting reports for your flyway. Visit ducks.org/migration alerts.
So, Tony, when you see this kind of response, this just phenomenal moist soil response, and you know that those plants produce all sorts of groceries for ducks, how does that influence your thinking about future habitat management? Because you're a businessman, right? And there's some economics in all of this.
Sure.
How does that influence your thinking? Have some of those things gone through your mind, and maybe you think about doing things differently in the future, or what goes through the mind of someone like you?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's certainly not just because of this year, but just kind of my mentality. When I've been managing duck stuff for a long time, and it's all been through trial and error. My uncle helped run a couple of refuges in Illinois and learned a lot from him, but what you really learn is just get out there and do it. I've made a ton of mistakes and hopefully learned from them, but the biggest thing I've learned is when I was younger, you got to plant food. You got to plant millet. You got to plant buckwheat. You want to disc up every square inch of it and plant it with something, because that's going to be better. It's something you planted. It's going to be better than what's there. When in reality, the natural moist soil foods, your smartweed, your natural millet, nutsedges, ducks have been living off of that since the beginning of time.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And the good thing about those seeds is it's kind of survival of the fittest. They've been genetically altered for thousands of years. So if you plant Jap millet like I did this year, the end of July, first part of August, man, it looks pretty. Well, now you catch a mid-August flood, and that's going to look like a moonscape. It's dead. It's gone. Whereas that natural that natural stuff, a lot of time, I mean, it gets through those flood events. It ends up still producing.
Yeah, I'll back up here a minute just for clarification. When you mentioned genetically altered, we're talking about genetic alteration that occurs naturally through some of those plants that survive, and those that don't survive, they don't get to persist through time. And so that's that genetic alteration. That's just kind of interesting that we use those words in those different ways. But yeah, that is a pretty cool phenomenon that you're seeing there.
I've moved away from, planting millet and all that stuff through the years. As I've been managing properties, and I primarily do natural moist soil when I can, because like we just said, it's survival of the fittest. I mean, It's been there for years, and it's the best stuff there is. But more importantly, I think this gets overlooked a ton. You can manipulate natural vegetation. So your wild millet, your smartweed, you can manipulate it, with a brush hog. Where if you plant it, you can't touch it.
Right. That's right.
And something that I've really noticed, and I think gets overlooked, is how much those ducks are keying in on bugs and invertebrates.
Yeah.
And you cut them open the first 3 weeks of our season, and they're crammed full of bugs and invertebrates. And your bugs and invertebrates are going to do better in horizontal cover than they are vertical cover. At least from my experience, you would certainly know a lot more than me.
Yeah. So building off of that a little bit, Tony, what we've learned over the decades of all the research that we've done is that ducks do indeed benefit from having a diversity of lands, diversity of habitats to exploit. Because as you mentioned, that diversity of habitat provides all sorts of different types of foods that are important from nutritional standpoints, whether it be energy, amino acids that make up the proteins and all sorts of minerals, whatever else, ducks need those sort of diverse habitats. And I know that's something that's going to be that you're going to be aware of and you're going to be keen to. And I'm not terribly familiar with all the different types of habitats that you manage, but I'm assuming in some years you might have some agricultural-based habitats. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do, absolutely. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small fraction of the ground that we flood. The vast majority of it is moist soil.
And out of curiosity, I don't know if you have enough information to really data to inform this. Do you see sort of a different response of the birds between those different types of habitats? Is the composition of the birds that you harvest in those different habitats similar? Or
yeah, for sure.
Oh, okay. So it's different.
A duck's nutritional needs are going to change based on the weather, at least from what I've seen. They're keying in on, they're eating bugs and invertebrates, and then you're catching them getting colder. They might be going to dry fields, agriculture fields. They might be going to flooded agriculture fields. But then as soon as you get that warm up, they're going back to the moist soil. They've lived off it for years. And that's the stuff that's going to get them back north in the spring. That's still going to be there. As far as the species of ducks, you're going to kill everything in a moist soil field that you're going to kill in a flooded agricultural field. They're all using the same stuff. Obviously your little, what I call summer ducks, pintails and teal and gabble and all that, they go south a lot earlier. They're not as hardy as mallards are, but they're all eating the same stuff. And I think for me, as a waterfowl manager per se, the biggest thing I always tell myself and I always remember is you can't put all your eggs in one basket.
Absolutely.
There's nothing you can plant or do to make a farm good 60 straight days.
That's right.
You have to have diversity.
Yeah, and you can apply that philosophy. You're basically talking about diversifying your portfolio, and that diversification is important for the returns that you see. That's one way of looking at it. But that diversification is also important for meeting the needs of the birds, and that's something that sort of as a scientist, as someone who's sort of enthused by all these details and what does a bird need. That's one of the other ways that I kind of like to see that diversification of a portfolio, and so it's pretty cool that you see it that way. And recognize the benefits of that.
Sure, and and moist soil management goes. It touches on so many different things and decides what you're growing. At least to me.
Yeah.
The good thing with the natural foods, you can manipulate them, like I said, so you're getting better bug and invertebrate habitat. But I always try to look at what my farm looks like from the air. What do our farms look like from the air?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, 30 years ago. you'd see the grand migration, the grand passage. I mean, it'd be coming during the day, just V after V after V coming. But anymore, to me, it seems like most of them are migrating at night. And you can have all the food in the world, but when they're flying over, if that moonlight isn't lighting up that water, they're not stopping. So anything for me, and like in the moist soil areas, the natural stuff, anything under 6 inches of water, I'm waiting until it matures and then mowing it pancake flat, cutting it off at ground level where that fodder's piling up. It's loading up with bugs and invertebrates. When you're flooding it, it's showing good water from the air when they're migrating. And once you get them to stop, then they're going to stick around.
We don't want to keep you on too much longer, but man, we really appreciate you joining us today. We just really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
All right, see you guys. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.